The moment the flight attendant pointed toward the aisle and silently gestured for him to stand, the entire VIP cabin fell into an uneasy stillness that no one dared to acknowledge. He sat there, calm, composed, dressed in understated elegance, yet suddenly treated like he did not belong in the very seat his boarding pass had clearly confirmed. Eyes drifted, whispers spread, and assumptions hardened in the quiet luxury of first class. What no one around him realized was that the man they were trying to remove was not just another passenger. He was the owner of the private investment group that had quietly acquired a controlling stake in the airline just weeks earlier. And in the second that followed, the air inside that cabin did not just shift, it froze. Before we begin, make sure to share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Storie for more powerful and thought-provoking stories. The airport was buzzing with the polished chaos of early morning travel, where business suits moved with urgency and luxury travelers drifted with quiet entitlement. Among them walked a man whose presence was deliberate but unassuming, someone who had learned long ago that power did not always need to announce itself loudly. His name was Marcus Hale, a self-made black CEO whose journey had been carved through years of silent resilience, calculated risks, and a lifetime of navigating spaces where he was often the only one who looked like him. Marcus had grown up in a neighborhood where expectations were low, but dreams were stubborn. His mother worked double shifts, his father ran a small repair shop, and every lesson he learned about dignity came from watching them endure disrespect with quiet strength. He carried those lessons into adulthood, into boardrooms, negotiations, and billion-dollar deals, always aware that success did not shield him from bias. If anything, it made him more visible. On that particular morning, Marcus was traveling for a strategic executive meeting across the country. The airline he chose was not random. It was, in fact, the very airline his investment firm had recently acquired majority stake in through a discreet corporate transaction. The acquisition had not yet been publicly announced, as internal restructuring was still underway. To the world, he was simply another passenger boarding a premium flight. He arrived early, dressed in a tailored dark jacket, minimalist watch, and the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to leadership rather than attention. At the gate, the VIP boarding lane welcomed him without issue. His ticket was verified, his credentials scanned, and he was escorted to the first-class cabin where wide leather seats, soft lighting, and attentive service promised a comfortable journey. Marcus settled into a seat by the window, placing his tablet neatly on the fold-out tray. Outside, the aircraft crew prepared for departure, while inside, the cabin filled with executives, affluent travelers, and frequent flyers accustomed to exclusivity. He noticed the subtle glances, the kind he'd grown used to over decades. Curious, skeptical, quietly judgmental. Still, he remained focused, reviewing documents about operational restructuring and corporate ethics reforms he intended to implement within the airline. This flight was supposed to be routine, predictable, uneventful. A few minutes later, a white passenger entered the cabin with visible impatience, scanning seat numbers with an expression that suggested inconvenience rather than confusion. The passenger paused near Marcus's row, frowned slightly, and looked at the seat assignment with growing irritation. Though Marcus paid little attention at first, he sensed a shift in atmosphere when the flight attendant approached with a polite but tense smile. Airline staff were trained to maintain composure, but there was a subtle hesitation in her posture, a discomfort that Marcus recognized instantly. Years of corporate negotiations had sharpened his ability to read people before they spoke. Something about the interaction unfolding nearby was not procedural. It was personal. The white passenger gestured subtly toward Marcus's seat, and although no words were spoken loudly enough to disrupt the cabin, the tone of exchange carried an unmistakable implication. The flight attendant expression changed, transforming from professional warmth into cautious authority. She glanced at Marcus's boarding pass display on the seat screen, then back at the passenger, then again at Marcus. Marcus remained calm, unaware that within minutes, a simple seat dispute would evolve into a moment that would expose something far deeper than a misunderstanding. The airline prided itself on luxury, professionalism, and elite service, yet like many institutions, it carried invisible cultural biases embedded beneath polished branding. He leaned back, composed and observant, unaware that this seemingly small interaction was about to unravel years of internal culture he had already suspected, but not yet witnessed firsthand. As the boarding process continued, the cabin's atmosphere subtly shifted from relaxed exclusivity to quiet tension. A few passengers began watching discreetly, sensing that something was wrong, though no one openly intervened. Marcus noticed a shift but chose patience, a habit forged through decades of being underestimated in high-stakes environments. What he did not yet know was that the next request directed toward him would not be about clarification. It would be about removal. And in that moment, the foundation of a billion-dollar airline's internal culture was about to collide with the calm composure of the man who now owned it. The flight attendant returned moments later, this time accompanied by a senior cabin supervisor whose demeanor carried a rehearsed firmness. Their steps were measured, their expressions controlled, but the tension in their approach was unmistakable. Marcus observed quietly as they stopped beside his seat, their presence drawing the attention of nearby passengers who now watched with growing curiosity. The supervisor glanced briefly at Marcus's attire, his calm posture, and the luxury seat he occupied, yet something in her expression suggested that her decision had already been made before any verification process was completed. Marcus remained composed, his hands resting calmly on the armrest, his breathing steady, his awareness sharp. The subtle assumption that he did not belong in that seat hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. The cabin lighting reflected softly across polished surfaces as the supervisor gestured discreetly toward the aisle, indicating that Marcus should stand. There was no urgency in the aircraft's operational status, no emergency, no procedural announcement. Only a quiet but firm implication that he was occupying a space reserved for someone else. Passengers nearby exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. Others observed silently, conditioned by social norms that discouraged intervention in moments of public authority. Marcus slowly retrieved his boarding pass from the seat display and held it visibly, a silent confirmation of legitimacy. Yet the supervisor's posture did not soften. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, maintaining a professional tone that masked a deeper presumption. The white passenger remained standing nearby, arms crossed, visibly confident that the situation would resolve in their favor. The injustice unfolding was not loud. It was subtle, procedural, and socially coded in a way that made it appear administrative rather than discriminatory. Marcus felt a familiar sensation settle in his chest. Not anger, not shock, but recognition. This was not the first time he had been questioned in spaces of privilege. Boardrooms, luxury hotels, exclusive lounges. He had experienced variations of this moment throughout his career. Yet something about this instance felt heavier, more symbolic. The supervisor gestured again, this time with slightly more insistence. A quiet ripple spread through the cabin. Marcus rose slowly, not out of compliance, but out of clarity. His movement was controlled, deliberate, and dignified. He looked around the cabin, not seeking validation, but observing reactions. Some passengers avoided eye contact. Others watched closely, sensing that something deeper than a seat dispute was unfolding. The supervisor signaled toward a seat several rows behind an Economy Plus section, presenting it as an alternative without any formal verification process. The assumption was clear: relocation without question. Inside, Marcus's mind shifted from passenger mode to executive awareness. He had spent weeks reviewing internal reports about customer experience disparities, complaint patterns, and diversity training gaps within the airline. Yet reports were abstract. Data was impersonal. This moment, however, was real, direct, and undeniable. He allowed the situation to progress, not because he lacked authority, but because he wanted to see how far institutional bias would go when unchallenged. The cabin crew proceeded with procedural confidence, unaware that the man they were attempting to relocate was the very executive whose decisions would soon determine their professional futures. Passengers whispered quietly, their assumptions shaped by visible identity rather than verified information. Some likely assumed a booking error. Others silently accepted the narrative that the white passenger's claim carried more legitimacy. Marcus walked a few steps into the aisle, his posture still composed, his expression calm, but increasingly resolute. His silence was not weakness. It was observation. The senior supervisor reached for the seat assignment scanner, briefly glancing at Marcus's boarding pass. For a split second, Confusion flickered across her face. The seat number matched perfectly. The ticket was valid. The system confirmed first-class authorization. Yet instead of pausing the situation, she hesitated, then continued with the relocation suggestion, prioritizing complaint over confirmed record. That hesitation revealed everything. It was no longer about logistics. It was about perception. Marcus felt the weight of decades of systemic bias crystallize into a single corporate moment. He thought about his mother's lessons on dignity. He thought about the countless professionals who endured silent discrimination in elite spaces. He thought about the responsibility that came with power, not just to succeed, but to challenge injustice when witnessed directly. The cabin atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second. A junior flight attendant nearby looked increasingly uneasy, her eyes moving between the supervisor, Marcus's valid ticket, and the observing passengers. She sensed a discrepancy but remained silent, bound by hierarchy and protocol. The white passenger's posture remained rigid, confident, and expectant, as though the outcome had never been in doubt. Marcus slowly returned his boarding pass to the display slot, his decision now forming with absolute clarity. This was no longer about a seat. It was about institutional accountability. The aircraft doors were still open. Ground operations were active. Corporate policy manuals he had personally reviewed emphasized inclusivity, fairness, and zero tolerance for discrimination. Yet in this live scenario, policy had collapsed under assumption, and that realization marked the moment the narrative began to shift from passenger inconvenience to executive reckoning. The silence inside the cabin reached a point where even the hum of the aircraft systems felt louder than usual. Marcus stood still in the aisle, not reacting emotionally, not raising his voice, not escalating the situation in any visible way. Instead, he reached into his jacket and calmly retrieved his phone, scrolling briefly before selecting a contact that very few people inside that aircraft would ever imagine he possessed. Within seconds, a secure internal executive line connected. His posture remained composed as he typed a short, precise message detailing the ongoing incident, including the flight number, crew identification tags, and a time-stamped description of the discriminatory relocation attempt despite verified seat authorization. Back at the airline's corporate headquarters, the executive operations team monitored real-time flight data dashboards. When Marcus's message appeared on the internal leadership channel, the room shifted from routine oversight to immediate alert. His name alone carried authority that bypassed layers of corporate hierarchy. Inside the aircraft cabin, the supervisor interpreted his silence as compliance and signaled once more toward the rear seating area. The expectation was clear. The situation should conclude quietly. But instead of moving further back, Marcus turned slightly toward the front of the cabin and remained standing, his expression calm yet unwavering. A subtle ripple of tension spread across the flight crew as the captain's communication device suddenly emitted an urgent alert from headquarters. Moments later, the captain received a direct instruction from corporate operations requesting an immediate delay in departure and a review of a reported discrimination incident in the VIP cabin. Confusion spread quickly among the crew. The supervisor's confidence faltered slightly as she noticed a sudden shift in operational protocol. The junior flight attendant's expression shifted from uncertainty to realization, her eyes widening as internal whispers began circulating among the staff. Then came the second message from headquarters, a priority directive. Full crew identification verification requested. The supervisor's hands trembled slightly as she scanned her internal device, now displaying an executive-level alert mark with Marcus Hale's corporate signature authorization. The name triggered immediate recognition. Corporate briefings over the past month had repeatedly referenced the new majority stakeholder and restructuring executive who would soon oversee organizational reforms. The man standing in the aisle was not just a passenger. He was their new CEO. The atmosphere inside the cabin transformed instantly. The white passenger's confident posture dissolved into visible discomfort. Nearby travelers who had watched silently now exchanged shocked glances as the weight of the unfolding realization settled across the cabin. Marcus remained composed, not displaying anger, not raising his voice, but allowing the gravity of truth to surface naturally. The supervisor's expression shifted from authority to shock, then to fear, as the implications of her actions became undeniable. Her earlier assumptions replayed silently in her mind. The seat dispute, the relocation insistence, the failure to verify records before acting. Corporate headquarters issued a third directive: immediate stand-down of involved personnel pending internal investigation. The captain stepped into the cabin, now fully aware of the situation's magnitude. The professionalism in his posture was evident, yet the tension in his eyes revealed an understanding that this was no ordinary operational concern. Marcus slowly turned toward the cabin crew, his composure unshaken, his presence commanding without a single raised word. Years of leadership had taught him that true authority did not require volume. It required clarity. The supervisor stepped back instinctively, her earlier certainty replaced by visible regret. The junior attendant lowered her gaze, visibly shaken by the realization of what had occurred. Corporate protocol escalated in real time. Executive authority authorization confirmed. Personnel accountability review initiated. In that moment, the injustice that had unfolded in subtle silence was now exposed under the full weight of corporate consequence. Marcus's decision was not driven by ego or retaliation, but by principle. He had spent years advocating for ethical leadership and equitable corporate culture. Allowing this incident to pass without action would contradict everything he stood for. The aircraft remained grounded as headquarters communicated directly with the captain and senior operations staff. Internal records were reviewed, body cam footage requested, and customer treatment policies activated. The words that would define the moment were not spoken loudly. They were documented officially, and the outcome was immediate. The supervisor and the senior crew members directly involved were formally relieved of duty pending investigation, escorted respectfully but firmly out of active service responsibilities. The decision was procedural, lawful, and aligned with corporate ethics enforcement. The cabin remained silent as the reality settled in. Marcus returned to his original seat, not as an act of dominance, but as a restoration of rightful space. His composure never shifted. His dignity remained intact. The white passenger, now visibly uncomfortable, avoided eye contact entirely. The earlier confidence replaced by an awareness of how quickly assumption had turned into consequence. The turning point had arrived, not through confrontation, but through truth, authority, and accountability. As the aircraft finally prepared for departure, the atmosphere inside the cabin was no longer defined by quiet assumptions, but by reflection. Passengers who had witnessed the incident now sat in contemplative silence, processing the events that had unfolded before them. Marcus looked out the window as the runway lights blurred into motion, his thoughts heavy yet focused. This incident was not isolated. It was a living example of the systemic bias he had already suspected existed within the airline's operational culture. Data reports could suggest patterns, but lived experience revealed truth. Upon landing, Marcus did not seek public spectacle or media attention. Instead, he returned directly to corporate headquarters and initiated a full-scale cultural audit of the airline's training protocols, bias awareness programs, and customer service decision frameworks. Internal investigations confirmed that the relocation attempt had not been based on policy, but on assumption influenced by passenger bias and unchecked procedural authority. The findings were sobering. Within weeks, the airline implemented mandatory equity training, revised conflict resolution protocols, and a zero-tolerance enforcement structure for discriminatory decision-making. Anonymous reporting channels were strengthened, and customer treatment audits became a permanent operational requirement. The junior flight attendant who had hesitated but sensed the injustice was later commended for her internal report, which aligned with Marcus's documented account. Her integrity became a symbol of ethical awareness within hierarchical systems. The supervisor and involved staff were not publicly humiliated, but were held professionally accountable through formal disciplinary review processes aligned with corporate ethics policy. Marcus believed in accountability, not revenge. The incident, though deeply personal, became a catalyst for institutional reform. Months later, internal surveys showed measurable improvements in customer experience fairness metrics, particularly among minority passengers who previously reported subtle discriminatory treatment. The airline's brand reputation strengthened, not because the incident was hidden, but because it was addressed transparently and responsibly. For Marcus, the experience reaffirmed a lifelong truth. Success does not eliminate discrimination, but it creates the power to challenge it. He reflected on his childhood, his parents' resilience, and the countless professionals who endured silent injustice without executive authority to correct it. His actions on that flight were not just about one seat. They were about setting a precedent that dignity should never depend on perception. The story quietly circulated within corporate leadership circles as a case study in ethical accountability and executive responsibility, not as a tale of power, but as a lesson in leadership grounded in justice. Passengers who had witnessed the moment later shared reflections online, not revealing identities, but highlighting how quickly bias could surface in elite environments when left unchecked. Marcus never sought recognition for the incident. Instead, he ensured that the systems responsible for such moments were restructured to prevent repetition. Because true leadership is not proven when things go right. It is revealed when injustice is confronted with calm, courage, and conviction. And the most powerful lesson of that flight was not that a CEO was disrespected. It was that dignity should never be conditional. No matter the seat, no matter the status, no matter the assumptions. If this story moved you, reminded you of the importance of dignity, fairness, and standing against injustice, don't forget to share, comment, and subscribe to the channel Black Voice Storie for more powerful stories that inspire awareness and change.